Hello, my name is Kate Mackenzie and welcome to my podcast. Today I have the enormous delight to introduce you to Marianne Power, journalist and writer of the wonderful book Help Me, where she spent a year doing a famous self-help book every month and doing it to the nth degree, from jumping out of a plane, being a naked model for artists, doing stand-up comedy, trying out all kinds of dating techniques and going on the Hoffman method, if you know that, where you bang pillows and release all your anger. And she spent an entire year engaging in growth and change. It took her to some difficult places because she kept, knocking herself into different places. And basically, if you read her book, which I would really recommend, it's hilarious and brilliant. Every chapter she's doing something extraordinarily vulnerable that most of us would steal away from. And that's what makes every line and every chapter so inviting and delightful, because you're like, oh my God, is she going to? Yes, she is. She really is. Oh, how's that going to work? So you're taken on an amazing journey, and it's just really delightful and delicious. And she's a delightful and delicious person, and she came out of it really quite changed, I think, really quite different, much more accepting of herself, much more aligned with herself, much more spacious in herself. And so I thought it was a really lovely conversation. I really adore Marianne. I know her because she wrote about me in Red magazine. She did a profile on my work teaching flirting, and we had a wonderful connection, and we've stayed in touch ever since. She's done writing workshops since lockdown on Saturdays, which I've gone to, which are gorgeous. And so I hope that you really enjoy this conversation. I did. Hello, Marianne. Thank you so much for being with me today. What a treat it is to be with you in your lovely home, and to talk to you about your fantastic book, Help Me, which I have enjoyed so much, and I'm sure so many have enjoyed, and has taken, it took me on a completely opening adventure. And so I've got some questions, if that's okay.
Of course.
Ask you about your adventure and how you are and what's happened to you. So to start with, this is going to be very direct, but Marianne, all the way through, and it's a rare treat for me, I'm sure for others, but I was hooked on every sentence. For example, felt like Mother Teresa with Hugh Hefner, or you started one chapter with a quote from your mom, no husband and children. Do you know what I mean? It just mesmerizing quotes. I mean, you started the book with, I think, being naked as a life model. I mean, the whole book was mesmerizingly, warmingly, excruciatingly revealing.
It is excruciating in parts, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, wonderful, but I was hooked. I mean, every sentence was hooking and revealing and funny. So I wanted to ask you, so you were naked, you bore your soul.
I was naked in every way, I think.
Every single way a person could. And yet you took us on board, and it's almost like it revealed our souls, I feel like, by reading it. So just tell me about the process of literally making yourself naked. 1, doing it for a year. 2, putting it in a book. 3, making it naked around the world.
I know.
You really went naked.
I really did. And I didn't really realize I was doing it. So the book started life as a blog, which I started writing in 2014. And at that point, I was a journalist, and this self-help book was sort of like this secret habit that I had, reading self-help books. And I was actually really quite unhappy, but not not necessarily letting onto the world. And this blog I thought would be a really clever way where I would read self-help books and test them out. But I never ever expected it to get as revealing and honest as it did. I just didn't. I thought I would read these books, go and do some of the stuff they said, and I would share it in a funny way while secretly learning and fixing myself. But the blog, something about, I think I was just very lucky that the people that started reading the blog quite soon were very engaged. And then it felt wrong to be just giving a glossy version of something, because these people became my friends. So when I did stand-up comedy or jumped out of the plane, the reality when I jumped out of the plane, which was part of my Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway month, I hated it. Now, part of me, if I was in journalist mode, might have wanted to pretend that it was okay. The reality was I hated it. So my blog post was, I hated it, so I will never do it again. And so I didn't go into it expecting for it to be as revealing as it was. And once it all started and people got on board and were supporting me and cheering me on, it just became open, very open. And then I think there's something that happens between you and a laptop that it was always just me sort of feeling like I was emailing friends. And then when I was turning that into a book, it was just me and a computer. So I think sometimes you can almost not quite realize yourself what you're really being open about. And then when it came to recording the audiobook of I had to record the audiobook, and sometimes then when I was reading passages out loud while the producers were in the room, and I was like, oh my God, are you admitting this? And but anyway, that was the way it came out. And thank God, I'm just so lucky in that 99.99% of the response has been me too, me too, me too. So it turned out that the bits that I've spent probably quite a lot of time pretending weren't there or trying to, hide, most of us have them, so it's been the most liberating thing for me as a personal human. I feel much more at ease with other humans since doing all this, because so much was people coming up to me saying me too, me too, me too, me too. Yeah,
I can totally imagine that, because you were just so wonderfully afraid, cynical, scared, vulnerable, noticing, reflective, all at the same time. And so because of that, jeopardy, but mild jeopardy, like, oh my God, taking us into the jeopardy. It was like every chapter was, oh, I couldn't stop reading it, because you're with you. And then one of my favorite things all the way through, because I have ginormous red hair, as yes, if you don't mind me saying that, is the regularity of whether you'd washed or done anything with your hair, which I completely relate to, because
it takes so long, Kate, doesn't it, with our hair?
A mammoth task. And it has different moods, and it has moods, and it's completely dependent. And I loved, when you were dating, you put your best photographs on the dating profile, of course, and of course we have to do. But then you're like, what will they think? Will I turn up? Because when you're a redhead with ginormous hair, there's no telling how this is going to land with people, is there? Because people go, oh, but it's marvelous to have big red hair. Yes, but there's no telling what it's going to do on the day and what people are going to feel like. So
just how big it's going to be.
How big, or frizzy, or any combination. So I just adored the way the hair appeared all the way through, and the big jumpers, which I adore as well.
Oh, well, I'm wearing one now. And do you know what the funny thing is? This might sound like a kind of a humble brag, and maybe it is, but this really tickles me. The New York Times reviewed the book, which I just could not even believe in a million years that the New York Times. But the reviewer found me deeply, deeply frustrating because of how much I went on about my hair and not washing my hair. And the reviewer was like, for God's sake, will you just wash your hair? So it's funny that what you can relate to drove her mad.
Do you know what, though? I adore that review. I'm sure that wasn't necessarily easy. It's not.
No,
easy.
It was funny, actually.
I adore that, because that just,
I adore that because to me, I went to New York. I had to lie down a lot of time because the energy was so strong and so on it and
it's
go
so on it. So of course they're like, just wash your hair.
And I'm like, it was so on it. It was so adrenalized. I thought London was on it. I went to New York. I'd never been anywhere so on it. So it makes sense to me. And New Yorkers, they'd be up at 5, I imagine.
Just sorting it out, getting on with their day.
Whereas, London's fast, but no, I couldn't compare to New York. Was like it was out of space. It was so far.
Yeah.
So I can really get. That appointment with your hair would be in the diary, or probably you get someone round to your house. I don't know. I don't know what happens in New York, so that makes sense.
Yeah, but it was funny, and I'm glad you liked it. But my sister has actually banned me from. I'm writing another book now. She's banned me from talking about washing my hair in every chapter because I didn't even realize I was doing it. Because Kate, as you know, when you've got hair this big, it's just a constant thought. I should wash it. I can't be asked to wash it. Will I wash it?
I was so, and also, you talked about just early on meeting another guy with ginger hair. Could you have 2 gingers together? And although I like ginger men myself, but I got it. It was so wonderful for me because freckled, fair, huge hair is, people might, sometimes I've said, you don't dare say to people, I'm not sure if I'm attractive because it sounds like you're looking for a compliment. But so for you saying this, for all the redheads out there, thank you, saying, managing all this, and then the lovely guy, Harry, who, just lovely, sorry, I don't want to reveal all the book, that you did get moments where you accepted you were attractive and that things, if somebody's asking you out, they've taken you in with the red hair and the fair skin. And
true. I think the people who like red hair really like red hair, and we're not for everyone.
No, that's
so. Right. And I think then that growing up probably as a teenager in England, in Ireland, red hair is more common and really accepted as an attractive thing. In England, in the 80s, it wasn't. You didn't want to be the ginger kid, and I wasn't bullied or anything, but it wasn't considered attractive. And so I think that's been quite an insecurity that I've had, kind of not being one of the normal pretty blonde girls or something. Whatever these ideas that we get. Yeah,
totally. There's a show called The Millionaire Matchmaker, American show, very popular, and she will not match redheads.
No,
the only group. She's the only, right? I don't know if you call it a race or color. It's the only color she will not matchmake. She said only strange Irishmen like redheads. So, which is lucky because I've married a strange Irishman.
It's just as well. I really like strange Irishmen too. They're right up my streets.
That's what I was thinking, because you like the beardy, tweed jackety, curly haired, which is the kind of
eccentric. That's what I like.
Irishy, Scottishy, Welshy. You know what I mean? It's so
Celtic. Yeah.
It's lucky that's your type, because there's a matching, isn't it? So this is what I wanted to ask you, was the vulnerability with the humor, which of course is like stand-up comedy, which you did, and you did it over and over, standing in front of rooms saying, can I have a date? Or I'm scared to do this. The way you started every chapter with that nakedness and each sentence, like I said, I felt like Mother Teresa with Hugh Hefner, which again is so revealing. Did you have to work for hours to get this nakedness down, or was it just flowing? The crafting of your sentences and your chapters. Do you see what I mean? Because they were so beautifully bang. They were all like in the face. Yeah.
So the blog, when I was writing the blog, it really was like writing emails to friends. I never gave the actual writing any thought. So then when I went to the book, I was really lucky in that I had sort of all this like live material, so every time I would, chat up a stranger or do stand-up comedy, I would be blogging the next day. And it really was like telling my friends. And then he said, and then I said, So I had all the live material, but what did take me, well, it was probably more than a year of moving that blog into a book, because the structure of a book and the whole story arc that has to go over a book. It was my first book, and I thought a book was actually just lots of long articles. I didn't know that it's a whole other thing. And so there's lots that happens that never made it into the book, because in the structure it just wouldn't have fitted. So actually, in some ways, like the sentence like Hugh Hefner and Mother Teresa, that's the kind of stuff that just pops in my head. But the construction of the structure of what was left in and what was taken out actually took me a very, very long time.
That makes a lot of sense, because there really was a flow, and I really did want to know what's happening with that bloke, and what's happening with Gemma and Rachel and Sarah. And so that mixed in with those gems of sentences and your absolute nakedness in every chapter, I did want to know. So it was like Bridget Jones's Diary or you know, Wuthering Heights. I did want to know what's going to happen next to you. So that's the not novel, because it's not.
I wanted, because I knew people who read self-help books would probably be interested in this, but I also wanted it to be a really entertaining, good story for people that would never pick up a self-help book. So it was important that it did read as a good story anyway. And that's where the craft, and that's when I had to go away and read lots of books about how to write books and learn how to structure things. And
that was beautifully done, because that was so evident that we were like a brilliant novel taken we're taken right into the heart and the crafting of the sentences. But you absolutely took us, and you're right, there was each chapter had an arc, but the whole story had an arc. And so I was left with this beautiful feeling of all your relationships, actually. All the relationships, because that you went into detail with, and this wonderful vulnerability about fear of conflict, which meant that you weren't going to necessarily let anyone too close, but you were surrounded by relationships.
And this is my second book is about love and relationships, so this is something that gets picked up a lot more in the book that I'm just sort of working on now. And I was so lucky in the first book, because you know, I'm in control of writing about me, and I chose to expose myself, although sometimes I wasn't really conscious of how much I was doing it, but still I was the one making that happen. And I was very, very lucky that my friends and family were all supportive of their parts in it, because that's when it gets complicated writing about your life. Because the very first version of the book I wrote, I didn't want to put any of them in it because I didn't want to implicate them, but then my friend read it and he was like, but no one lives in a vacuum. And I was just reporting this little me version. And so then with their permission, other friends and my family kind of got woven into it. And they're such an important part, because also, of course, they were the ones that were kind of mirroring what was going on. So at various points, they were concerned, like, what the hell are you doing? And this isn't making you happier. And also reassuring me. And so, they were a really important part. And I'm very grateful that they were all such, so generous about appearing in the pages.
So I know you made an amalgamation with your friends, but your mum and sister, your mum was your mum, wasn't she, obviously?
So mum was mum, and mum turned out to be everyone's favourite bit in it, which she's not actually in it an awful lot, but she does some fantastic one-liners. So her presence is felt throughout.
It was hilarious, I outside the kebab house ringing mum, and mum downloads like one of the worst fears anyone's ever heard of in their life, and it was just so beautifully, beautifully portrayed that, the way you and your mum were, and also you would go home to mum for soup and big jumpers. It was
so I was kind of on some ways pushing myself to these ridiculous degrees and jumping out of planes and chatting up guys and doing this kind of really quite extreme stuff. And then, of course, it's not surprising now looking back on it, but about 10 months in, I really started to come unstuck. And when I get unstuck, the first thing that happens is I get sick. And so then I went back to mum and I obviously just needed that kind of, soup and toast and a bit of reality.
That was so lovely. It was so
Yeah.
lovely. And what I noticed, Marianne, and it doesn't surprise me one bit, because knowing you as I do, you're the real, you are, you're the real deal, and very authentic and very congruent. I mean, it comes across every single page, as well as the artistry. But what happened was, like you said, you had people in Taiwan, you had people all around the world, relating and saying thank you, and then you now run writing courses and people celebrating that and thanking you. You got on telly, I think, in New York, which was so divine. So how was all that?
So when the book came out, and it came out, I think it's something like 31 different territories and maybe like 29 languages or something. It really went across the world, which was, the absolute dream come true for a first book. And there was lots of TV and radio and standing on stages around the world. And I was in you were talking a bit earlier about New York being a state, an adrenaline place. I was in a state of adrenaline for a year because, of course, I'd never done anything like that before. So I loved it and I was so grateful for it. And I was also in a kind of wide-eyed, not sleeping very much state. So I loved it all. And I now look back on it and kind of realize it was quite a lot. It was quite overwhelming at times. And I am just so lucky with basically how kind the response has been, because I think the me that's in the book is the me that gets on a stage, or the me that me. It's all so people. What was so beautiful is that after doing talks, or after being on telly, or doing those things, the conversations that would happen afterwards when people come up, even like for news presenters and then at book talks, and just there would just be an easy conversation, because I suppose I had exposed myself so much. There was no one-upmanship or trying to impress anyone. And so that's been the best thing that's come from it, is this kind of quite quick connection with strangers. And I love that. And I really love that. And I think I've probably got so used to it now, I forget that wasn't how it always was. And like you said, it's mad, because it's, countries like South Korea and Iran and South America and India, and they get always, the message is the same. It's like reading myself. I read your book and it's like reading myself. And I think, oh my God, in some ways we're having such different lives, and in other ways we're just not. There's so much, that we have in common. And so in lockdown, I was writing the second book and not doing very well with it, and living alone and actually just feeling incredibly lonely. I found this lockdown period hard. And so I just put a thing up on Instagram saying, would anyone be up for, doing some writing together? And that started about a year and a half ago. We now do these writing workshops on a Saturday, and we just come along, and it's like journaling, and I set some prompts and we have just a bit of a chat. But on those calls, we have people from basically every continent come. And again, the same thing happens by the end. Everyone is just chatting like they went to school together. And I love that. I love that. It's been the best thing that's come from it. A sense that we've all got more in common than we do, that we have differences, which might sound so cliched, but it seems to be the case with what's happening with the way people get in touch with me. Although, of course, there will be some people that look at the book and think this is the most ridiculous thing, and they don't get in touch. But the ones who get in touch,
And there's something in some people who talk about trauma, which is that relational resilience, like being resourced relationally, really supports people a different experience of themselves, and allows like that well-being of relational resilience allows for something to shift in people's experience of themselves, and allows them to handle their hyper arousal, the fight, flight, freeze responses. So I'm wondering, like, with this kind of connection of, sounds like really good responses from a lot of people, has that changed you?
It probably has. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm at ease now with people in a way that I wasn't before. And not that I was, particularly awkward before, but I was always fairly insecure and always thinking everyone was better than me and cleverer than me and that I didn't fit in, and that I don't seem to have that these days. And I know most of us aren't really socializing very much, but I actually generally can walk into most rooms now and feel like I belong there, which isn't something I felt a few years ago. And that's pretty lovely.
Yeah, so actually your vulnerability, your nakedness, your willingness to connect has actually connected you up
It really has.
ways,
Yeah.
and allowed you to come, you know, because shame, as we all know, is horrific in terms of keeping us separate from people. And when you've done the level of nakedness you've done, you know, I mean, how much shame can be left, really? It's like, it's quite it's quite, you know, to clear that much, especially from an Irish Catholic background, which is incredible, really.
Well, I mean, this book now that I'm writing now that I've is you know, love and sex in it, so there's whole new layers of shame coming up, actually.
Fabulous. So
so I'm very scared again, all over again. And I think with the first one as well, there was actually such innocence to it. I didn't quite realize what I was doing, and then the second time round, I'm more nervous now of reactions. And there's also this feeling of like, I got so lucky with the first one that the response was good, and we're living in this cancel culture and all this. I'm much more aware of it now. The first time I actually wasn't, but I'm doing it anyway. But there's, you can't assume that people are going to love you and that the things will go well, because we all make mistakes and push people's buttons without realizing what we're doing. And so I don't just take it for granted that it's going to always be as gentle as it was for the first one.
And in some ways, you're going deeper underground.
I am, exactly.
You're going to deeper areas.
Exactly.
And deeper embodied areas.
Exactly.
Somatic and sensuality, and you're going to much deeper areas. So, but again, you know, the thoughtfulness, you sound like you've got the thoughtfulness again. So again, you know, you can bring that thoughtfulness about the how.
I hope so, exactly. And that's sort of, yes, thanks, Kate, for understanding the way you do it. It's really lovely. So yeah, I hope so. I hope so, that there'll be that blend of thoughtfulness and awareness and humour as well, while also going quite deep, because I think that's also the first one. And again, I'm Irish, so I don't think I possibly realised how much humour was in everything, because I was just putting myself in ridiculous situations. I was never trying to be funny in the writing. I just knew that I was in ridiculous situations. And I suppose that carries on into this one. And it's funny, when the book first came out, and the very first interview I gave, the woman was asking me, the journalist, about what it was like being a comedic writer. I didn't know I was. I honestly didn't know I was. I just knew that I was in unusual situations, and I could see that it was ridiculous what I was doing, but I never actually set out to, you know, tell a joke or anything, you know.
You've just helped me out, because that's what I was wanting to ask you about being a comedic writer, because I just noticed I was mesmerized by every sentence, the vulnerability, the arcs, but the way you put language together. But that is quite Irish.
It's very Irish. So in Ireland, you have to take the piss out of yourself before someone else does. So that was basically, I think I was always knowing what I was doing was quite, you know, over the top. And any salt of the earth Irish mother such as mine would be, Jesus, Marianne, what are you doing all this for? So that was kind of running through the whole book, because, you know, part of me knew that. And then the other part was the part that was really unhappy and desperate and would do anything to try and fix herself, which is what this thing I had in my head, that I just need to fix myself. And I honestly thought that there were some people that were just sorted and together, and that if I tried hard enough, I could become one of those people. And of course, by the end, I realized that nobody is this kind of rock solid together person. It doesn't matter what it looks like.
And yet you became more rock solid and more balanced.
Well, I guess in some ways. I'm sure my friends and family would tell you I'm not, but in some ways, yes. In some ways,
not that you don't have vulnerability, but that's different to living on the edge of insecurity. That's a different.
No, I'm not there anymore.
You sound so resilient now. You're aware, like you don't know what's going to happen with the second book, but that's really different to being completely terrified.
No, no, it's true.
You sound like it's a very different space in yourself. And even talking about different choices around relationships or the relational realm is really different than not, you didn't say this, but I have to have a husband and children to feel myself. It's really different to think I'm going to look at choices and I'm going to explore choices.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I really loved that, you know, I mean, obviously it was quite a thing with your mother's quotes all the way through, but, saying to what she thought you would be, shouldn't be, and her kind of predictions for your life, and then working with that, you know, working with the limiting, obviously your mum is a mum and protective, but working with that and then looking at the limiting beliefs about what we're handed down, because it's natural, you know, parents will look at children and go, well, they're an artist, they're a writer, they're a no good, so, you know, and then but you explored it, and that's the thing. It sounded, even in the book, and I know that's probably the next book, you were exploring, well, there are different ways of being. Because actually, you know, I notice I'm married, I need a lot of space, and so does my husband, and that we didn't know that at the beginning. And so now we can be together and be spacious in the togetherness, but we didn't know that. We didn't know how that worked. And now, even going out to a cafe, if we go to a cafe where there's a lot of space, we're way more comfortable, because it gives you a bit of privacy, if that makes any sense. So people aren't listening to your conversation. Very simple tip for us, but it's opened doorways up. Understand, you know, so when you were saying, you know, fear of conflict, fear of getting close, and I thought we all need, it's like they do it in workshops, don't they? How close, how far can you be to someone?
Exactly.
And actually we all, if we get to know it, we can get to know what's comfortable, not comfortable, what's consent, what's not consent, where are you happy to be touched or not touched. It's kind of, there's lots of layers to this, and until we get in touch with that, some of us are going to go, no one's coming in.
It's true, because I don't even know how to navigate any of that.
No idea.
And we're not taught any of this stuff at school, and I wish we were, because I think I've always thought, and this is partly again what I'm unpicking in the second book, is that if you're in a relationship, you just have to be with someone. And I thought there was something wrong with me for not being able to cope in those situations. I didn't realize that there's a very human need for space, and there's a need for connection, and that you can kind of figure it out how much, and that we all need slightly different things. You know, for some people, they will be happy in each other's pockets, and for others, you know, it could be that a partnership isn't the right thing for them, or a partnership with, like you say, a lot of space. I remember, Helena Bonham Carter and Tim Burton at one point, they're now divorced, but at one point they were living in separate houses. And I remember reading that thinking, oh my God, that's ideal. And so I always love reading stories about people, or hearing about people that have configured their life in their own way, because I suppose for so long we've just been given the one happy ever after picture, but without very much detail of how people actually make that work. And then everything that isn't that is just a bit weird, or you don't hear about it. So I love that in today's world, or maybe I'm just noticing it more, there seems to be more examples of just different ways to configure your life and build your life and have people in it in different, there's been articles I've been reading recently about people marrying their friends, you know, having marriages so they can have the financial benefits and the security from friendships, you know, and my friends have been, some of them since the age of 4. So, you know, there's all these different ways that we can come together. So that's...
And what's extraordinary, Marianne, is that I think that this has been all the way through time. But the model we were often given in television and films is this cisgendered, heteronormative model, monogamous model. And I'm discovering it was hidden. Like the 60s was full of people swinging, the 70s were full of people having lovers, but they hid it. Or affairs. People hid stuff. You know, and we're on this threshold of people being a bit more open about navigating things differently. I think they did navigate them. They just hid it, or people were jilted at the altar and died because it was society deemed that was so dreadful, and you know, the shame of it, or in Ireland, you know, if you were a single mum in Ireland, you know, it's still shameful in Ireland, isn't it?
I think Ireland seems to have come so far in how they've legalized abortion, and they've brought in gay marriage, and the last, you know, they've really come so far, but that Catholic shame is it's so entrenched.
Strong.
It's, yeah.
Strong. So I'm sure, you know, and I noticed, you know, I was brought up Catholic, even though I had a very open upbringing. I was brought up Catholic strictly,
Right.
and I'm a sex therapist, and I noticed that there were parts of me, you know, wanting to focus on the love bit, the relationship bit,
Yeah.
because, and I think it's that Catholic.
Yeah.
We don't talk about sex, and then I notice when I talk to older people or different people, or I find out, you know, they're freewheeling, talking about, you know, it's just the assumptions I make.
It's true. And I think I've been doing a lot of that with this book, this second book too, that I'm fearful of. I'm sure it's all my own stuff, and I'm imagining other people's reactions, and and there you go. It's just part of it's part of things to work through, isn't it? This idea that sex is such a big part of life, whether we're having it or not having it, whether we're enjoying it or not enjoying it, and it's still a tricky thing to talk about. And I guess the only way for it to stop being tricky is just do it slowly and gently, and just keep trying a little bit at a time.
That's it. And I think that's what you've got so nicely, Marianne, which with what you did with the first book, and I imagine it'll be in the second book, is you took people in nicely, gently, and the comedic bit, which I can really get how Irish that is. And it's so delightful that you didn't see. I was like, wow, she's got a total comedy voice, like naturally it seemed to me, and it's lovely to hear you didn't realize that, because it just so natural. It's obviously innate, right? And I get it. And I just kind of adore that you're going to that natural comedic, cynical and sweet Irishness is going to probably go into the area of sex. I just think that's a fabulous combo, isn't it? Because you take us all with you.
I hope so. Yeah, we'll see. I hope so, because and I think Russell Brand talks about that, because, you know, he talks so much now around spirituality, and he says that the reason he's able to get away with talking about some of the stuff he does is because of the comedy that's in it. He can then take us to really deep, far out places. You know, we all, whether you like Russell Brand or not, he has a huge audience for something that some people would just go, what are you going on about? But somehow he can go, look, I know this sounds mad, but, and so I hope with a bit of humor we can get places, can't we?
You are doing the same thing. It is exactly the same thing. It's that you know, what he does. I'm an ordinary guy trying out these extraordinary things, and here's what I've learned, and I'm going to take you on the bridge with me, and you do that brilliantly. You know, I am an ordinary girl. Of course you're not, but you are as well. You have both.
Worries about what her mum's going to say when I come back from another naked adventure. You know?
That's enough nakedness, Marianne. I know what you mean, because I did a whole load, especially in my 20s. I did lots and lots of, and other times too, I've done lots of adventures. And I would tell my mum, and she went, I think that's enough taking your clothes off in workshops, Kate. I think that's enough of that. What are you doing? Even though my mum, you know, wrote erotic novels in the 80s. Yeah, successfully, like Jackie Collins type things. You know, that's how I learned about sex, from reading my mum's novels. But she's got, but it's funny. So she did that, but she also has her part, which is like, you know, be careful of that. So everyone's got their own little maps.
Exactly. And I'm sure there's so much that someone could say to me, and I go, and I'm a bit shocked by it. And then now instead of thinking that the shock is right, I now go, oh, why did that shock you? You know, because we all have our little blind spots or the no-go areas. And so,
right. And that's what I adore. You bring that polarity of that vulnerability with the cynical, with the shock, with the all of it. And, you know, I can't think of a better way to explore sex. Because it's handheld. Like handheld. Like Russell Brand is the same thing. He takes people into kind of multi-dimensional. I went to see a show recently. It was quite multi-dimensional. But he does it with hand holding. And I was in with some of the audience, and he did very vulnerable stuff mixed in with being a dad and a father and a husband, and then quite multi-dimensional. And these people said, oh, look at Russell, isn't it brilliant? He doesn't give two hoots. And I thought, that's what it looks like.
Exactly. I don't think that's ever true, or very rarely is that true.
Never.
So much agonizing has gone on.
Totally. He's exposing his soul
Yeah.
on stage,
Yeah.
and it could go wrong any moment.
Exactly.
It's live, you know. And I thought, wow, that's what they're taking. It's like a brother next door.
Yeah.
Telling them about weird concepts. They love it.
Yeah.
And he's just a cheeky chappy. And you're right. And you gave that lovely impression too. But of course, there's hours of working on this stuff and formulating it and creating arcs. But there's a guy called Barry McCarthy.
Okay.
And he's got the 7 stages of sexuality. And and he does a lovely arc.
Yeah.
Leading to intercourse. But the first stages have to be, hello, how are you? And then more warmth. And then a bit of flirting. And then a bit of sensuality. And leading to nakedness. Do you know what I mean? He said, you know, some people might be able to go straight to intercourse, but it's very rare. You need that wooing. Yeah. And I can really imagine that you'll bring that to your love book, the humor, the Irishness, funniness, the what's going on.
Yeah, thanks.
And we need that. It doesn't matter where we are.
Yeah. Yeah, because again, I think I had this idea before that anyone that was in a couple was just sorted. And I've now gone through enough workshops and read enough books and had enough conversations with people to realize that's not necessarily the case.
And you know, so yeah, absolutely. And it is, and everyone's navigating. And if we get depleted, you know, sex and sensuality is going to get depleted, like in anything. And couples have to learn how to flirt again, just like individuals do. Nobody's protected from having to learn how to get their flow. Everyone has to learn how to get in their flow. Yeah. Like you've been doing, you know, and I was obviously, it was amazing, you know, the story about money and
oh God, yes. So the money chapter, I'm terrible with money and still am, but the money chapter is one that people either read it and think, how on earth can anyone be this bad, or they can barely read it because it's so like themselves. So I've actually, there's a couple of friends have admitted to me recently that they stopped reading the book at that chapter because money was such a sore point for them too, that they actually couldn't do it. So then I said to them both, you can skip that chapter and keep reading. But money is such a emotional, painful topic for some of us.
Is there a money book, do you think, that might?
That was going to be the plan. So actually, so the plan was I would do love and then money. And I still need to definitely do a lot more work on money, and writing about myself the way I do is quite intense, and I'm not sure I'm not sure how healthy it is for me to do it again, or it might be that I just need a break in between. So I've had to think really long and hard about the fact that I write about myself for a living. I've had to question a lot of this, of like, why am I doing it? How much narcissism is in there? How much need for attention? Because again, the first time I did it, it was such innocence. I didn't know what I was doing. And then this has all come in with the second book now of like, is this helpful? Because honestly, the intention was always hopefully that it would be helpful. So, but it's also a very intense thing to put yourself under the microscope on a daily basis. And I'm not sure it's desperately healthy. I know it's not desperately healthy. There might have to be a little pause before I get into money.
It makes so much sense, because it's always that balance, isn't it? Always that balance of, you know, some people are genuinely okay with doing their craft and growing in their, in a way, power and fame, and they stay themselves. And it's still flourishing and it's in the service of the greater good. I love that all the way through your kindness motif. And it's in that checking in piece. It's kind of that's marvelous, isn't it, that you're checking that in, because it just a slight slip and it can go any which way, can't it? So it's like, checking. It's great that you've got that, isn't it?
We'll see. And I think that then there's also kind of wonder how much I'm talking to you now, Kate, is as your therapist mode, you're making me say all the things, but
sorry.
There's no, not to be sorry. but with this second one, I've also given myself a real hard time, and I think perhaps there's elements of self-sabotage going on, because, you know, again, there's also this bit of like, who are you to get all these nice messages? And I got lucky first time round, and, you know, almost a disbelief that people have been so kind. And yeah, I don't know. So it's a funny thing, and it's, I guess I'm just questioning it, and we'll take it slowly. And I think perhaps also I will want to take care of my real personal life, possibly more than the writer life. Whereas I think in the past my work always came first, and now I think it's probably more me as a human and my friends and my family and what we can all live with. And
so in a way, your space for you in your embodiment in your life has opened up. You're much more connected to your spaciousness as your life, and so that might change the writing, and that might develop it in a new way, which is beautiful. And that humour and that cynicism can, and the arcs and the vulnerability can still be there, but it might develop in a whole new, it might go in a new direction. And also what I was curious about is, I mean, one of the trainings I've done is internal family systems, and what they say is when things come our way, good, bad, or indifferent, our protectors, so parts of us that may have thoughts about things, will come online to check them. So what that means, so you know, when you're saying, who am I to get, that's normal when we're about to face some new things, because it's like our nervous system goes on alert. And so it might be that you're obviously doing work on yourself and attending to these parts, but it might be you want to attend to those parts.
Yeah.
Because there's parts going, oh, is it going to go? Oh, could it go wrong? And it's just kind of like, it might not, but you could give a bit of love if you wanted to. You could give a bit of love to those, because it's just normal.
Is it? Yeah.
It's normal, because it's parts of us that came in to protect us when we were very young, and they're still doing their job. So when we're about to try something new, well, your book was unbelievable because you tried something new all the time.
Yeah.
No wonder you had to crash after a break.
I had to go and sit under a dog duvet for a while.
Yeah, because anyone, you know, most of us avoid that stuff because it also brings up our protectors.
Yes.
That want to flight or flee or fight or so. But when you've obviously got enough now in yourself to dare to go further, and it might be just put your hand on your heart and look after that part that's getting frightened.
Yes, exactly.
Just go, it's all right. Look, if it's a flop, it's a flop.
But this is actually exactly what I'm doing. You know, that's, you know, if it's a flop or if I don't get it quite right, and they'll be learning in that too.
Yeah.
And just get on with the next thing, and just, you know, so yeah.
And what's beautiful is your audience. I know I will be reading the book. So your audience, do you know, you've already got some people who will read it. So either way, do you know what I mean? They'd love to read the next bit of the journey. So but it's soothing those parts. It's looking after, you know, as you grow. It's kind of like, how do you take care of those parts that tell you off? Because it's beautiful Irishness, isn't it? Stunning. Don't get too big for your boots, Marianne. It's just so gorgeous, isn't it? And because that's part of your ability to write is you've got that, oh my goodness, you've got that humor, but it's like that humor underneath that's got some sweet vulnerability that maybe is there. How has it been, you know, because your dad features obviously in a brilliant way. Did this give you some compassion for him in some ways, like putting, you know, in a way like he did something that affected you long term, but did that kind of bringing him in, your mum, did it bring you closer to them in some ways?
Oh, well, my dad died in 2016, so the same year as Prince and Terry Wogan.
Oh my God.
I know, he went in.
But
he was
significant, isn't it? Wow.
So he died. So he didn't get to see the book being published. Right. But my dad, he's Irish and left school at 16 and came to London and really did incredibly well with nothing to his name. And the fact that, you know, his daughters went to university and now wrote a book, was really extraordinary. Like, he was so proud of it. And so part of when I write about him in the book, it's to do with this very boom bust money thing that we had. And I have absolutely replicated it. When I have money, then the drinks are on me and I'm acting like, I don't know what, Madonna. And then I wonder where it's all gone the next day and I'm crying. And but no, I could see through the writing, like my dad was never boring. And I think I could probably write several books about dad. And I am now so grateful for the not boring bits of him, because again, that's what probably makes me a writer.
Yeah.
And he had a great sense of humor. So it didn't matter how bad things were, there would always be a joke he had quite a Paul Merton type sense of humor. I don't know if you know Paul, but this very dry humor.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful very grateful. I didn't realize probably how much of him is in me. And then Mum, Sheila, my sister, asked me, did it annoy me that everyone loved Mum so much? And it actually didn't at all. I loved that everyone loved Mum. No, I'm grateful for her being that real, just that like proper rock of sense. And that's not how I live my life. I'm sort of all over the joint. So I think sometimes we don't really understand each other that well, because she's such a level, solid person and I'm all over the place. And I feel very lucky that I can always come back to her, and she will always pick up the phone and go, what are you doing now? And so I feel great.
It's funny because in a way, like, the whole book has got flavors of what you've named in your parents. To me, it's got the kind of like devil may care every chapter, with this kind of Irish, what the hell am I doing?
There was that question every day was in my head, what the hell are you doing?
Do you know what I mean? So
it's true.
Kind of got your mum and your dad in every, you are that combo of the risk taker with the Irish cynicism. It's kind of that parental mix is somehow, well, the way you're telling it sounds like it's really come through you, and it brings us all in, because it's kind of level-headedness with.
Well, like, that's Mum. That's pure Mum in my head. I do have her in my head most days. Going, what are you doing?
Taking us into the wildest situations.
Yeah.
So now, how does that feel now? You've on many levels, some people would say this is the dream.
Yeah.
Getting published, being in 31 territories, an audiobook and translated into different languages, and people from all around the world connecting with you. This would be a lot of people would go, brilliant. And I know, obviously, Elton John said, it's one thing getting there, it's the next thing staying there. So I know you got the next piece of the puzzle, but there's a big piece about that spaciousness, about getting there.
Yeah.
How is that?
So when I had the idea for this blog and the name came to me, Help Me, and I wanted it to be a best-selling book, and I just sort of knew it would happen. I just did. But I mean, it took me much longer to happen than I thought. I didn't realize how hard it was to write a book. And so instead of taking a year, it ended up taking, between the blog and the book writing, I think I rewrote it 6 times, it ended up taking almost 4 years. I always believed in the idea. I didn't always believe in myself to deliver it properly, but the idea, it was like it had its own little energy, and I couldn't understand that no one had done this before. So it was one of those, because sometimes I think those ideas land on people where everyone, when I said it to people, they were like, everyone basically said someone must have done that before, and they hadn't. So I always believed in the idea, and I felt like I sort of had this responsibility. And when the writing wasn't going very well, I thought, you're fucking up this good idea. But it was never an option to not do it. And so when all the success started coming in, it was exactly what I wanted for it. And it was exactly sort of what I knew it deserved. Not me, but it as the idea. And by the end, I was really happy with the book. It felt like it was the book that it was meant to be. It just sort of, again, it was like its own thing. And then when the success was happening, it was gorgeous on one level, petrifying on another level, because I'd never gone through all this. You know, I couldn't even believe that one publisher wanted to publish me. You know, when I had my first meeting with Picador in the UK, straight afterwards, and they were offering me a book deal, I kept phoning my agent saying, are they going to change their mind? You know, because it's so unreal. So on one level, I believed in this as an idea, and another bit, I just couldn't believe it was happening to me. And then all these other deals kept coming in, and then I kept saying, are they going to change their mind? Are they going to? And I really thought that maybe I don't know, I until they all came out, it didn't feel real. And then when they did come out, I was doing so much press, which is really exciting, but also quite strange. Being asked a lot of questions on TV and radio and newspapers. So while it was everything I wanted to happen, and the emails from people are just the best thing, you know, through social media, just the contact with people, humans around the world is just the best thing. I think did have a real, I didn't see it at the time, but I kept procrastinating about starting the writing again. And so it's been 2 years now of writing this second book, and I've been very hard on myself, and I have lots of doubts about it. So I think there's quite a lot of self-sabotage going on, and that's sort of limiting very much this voice of like, you know, you got lucky again, don't push your luck. So Elton John, I agree with Elton John. It seems now that the real challenge is to believe that that wasn't just a fluke, that I wasn't just lucky with this one idea, that maybe I could do it something again that would be of value. And I still don't think I'm a proper writer, you know, like a book writer, a proper writer. I don't think I'm one of those. I watch Netflix a lot. You know, I'm not reading War and Peace. And so when I was going to book events, part of me again was just feeling like I'm a total fraud, and I just got lucky. And so with the second one, there's different fears, and maybe, you know, it will be different to the first one. And I guess just all that matters is you get up every day and you start again and you start again and you deal with whatever fears are happening that day. But I can now see that over the last couple of years, especially with lockdown, it hasn't helped, but there's been quite a lot of self-sabotage and not really running with some of the opportunities that were coming my way, because at a certain point, I think I just didn't know what to do with them. I thought
it makes sense. It makes, and I imagine you looked at Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic, where she does talk about having a successful book, and then how you handle that and the different parts of that, but also that resilience is can be very relationally linked up. So in lockdown, although you've got wonderful neighbors and family and friends, you know, that impact of being on one's own, which doesn't help, does it, with the head stuff?
It's funny because I thought, and this goes into the book I'm writing now, which actually ends in lockdown. I used to be someone that if I saw on film someone was put into solitary confinement, you know, in one of those prison movies, I used to think I could do that piece of piss. I thought I would love it. And I've done silent meditation retreats, and I used to just always think that was what I wanted. And then in lockdown, I got it, me and my thoughts in a computer, and I hated it. And I didn't realize how much I had built my normal life with a lot of interaction. Even though I live alone and I could come back to my own space, I was very connected. And even just working in coffee shops, silly stuff like that. So I found it was very important. Yeah, it was
because the coffee shop, you get the attunement of the barista or the person serving you, get their warm voice.
It's true.
Which allows for that flow.
Exactly.
Because you're, you know, people. Relaxed. It allows us to relax, because we've got people, especially if you like space, you can be in the coffee shop, not be intruded upon, but be warmly, like a little kid is.
Pure, exactly.
Pure, and it makes sense that you might judge yourself on writing, because your writing is so accessible. I mean, I think brilliant writing, but it's so accessible. And so if you're comparing yourself to War and Peace, which I don't
No, which I never wanted to. It's not that I ever aspired to that. I only ever just wanted to tell a story that was funny and helpful. But it's funny, these voices that can come in for book number 2, and then it's a bit like, well, who do you think you are? Because you're not really this.
It makes sense. And yet, you know, what's so beautiful, and of course those voices will come, we all, you know, I can totally relate and think, you know, I did a PowerPoint recently, and initially I put loads of intellectual stuff about the brain. And then I realized I can't remember all those phrases myself. And then I started to put cute pictures of animals in, and I much preferred it. It's all about flirting and dating. And once I put the cute pictures of animals, and it showed why connecting and hugging is important and loneliness does us in, I thought, oh yeah, I prefer it than all these quotes from famous brain people. And this is the thing, is that you're writing for that audience that needs your book, and they're not going to.
Yeah.
I mean, this is perfectly brilliant and mentally stimulating anyway, but it's like, we can have this book, now. Like the novel, you probably know it, but the novel, when it first came out in France, was considered very trash.
Yeah.
Right? It was considered low trash for women, as was soap opera, which now gets awarded, was considered low trash for women. And soap opera wasn't even considered, drama was okay, but playwrights wouldn't touch television. Television was considered very low art form originally when telly came out. And now, we accept telly as its own thing. So I think this wonderful book, which I adored, speaks to the heart. And I think this kind of heart writing, it's a milieu, and it's going to be more and more appreciated, isn't it? It's got its own place, hasn't it? So
thanks.
Alongside, Elizabeth Gilbert, it's got its place, hasn't it? But I agree. I agree. You were a genius, because this book had to be written, and it had to be written by you, I think, with your Irish English, with the sensibilities that you had. I think it had to be written by you because you were able to deliver it. But this had to be written, didn't it? I mean, literally.
I think so. Well, yeah, I'm glad, and I'm very glad it knocked on my head. But yeah, it did, and I think the English-Irish combination with what a genre that's considered to be very American, and it seems to work, because I actually love that American voice. Some people in England and Ireland hate it, and so I think the combination of a almost me acting as a translator or something worked.
And I know, like, because I follow you online, that you've been doing lovely stuff about embracing being single and embracing difference and embracing different parts of life. And so I'm curious about that, and curious whether, and you may or may not want to speak to this, whether you still want to date, or whether you're, because I've met lots of people recently who've told me how they love their single life.
Yeah.
And how much they enjoy it, women particularly, how much they're enjoying it, their own space, their own time, their own friendships. Still like a bloke, actually. They wouldn't mind a bloke on the scene. But in terms of their life, they're really loving what they've got. They just wouldn't mind to bring a man in as an extra. But and I'm just curious where you're at with.
Probably similar to that, rather than automatically thinking I must be a bit weird, which is what I've had, because I've mostly been single in my life, not always, but mostly. And there's always been this sort of feeling, what's wrong with me? And then when I have been in couples, it hasn't felt natural to me. And that could be that it's not the right partnership, or it could be that actually it's not the right setup for me. So I don't know. I'm very open.
But it's so lovely. It's so lovely to hear you, and also to hear that, because I follow you and I see you navigate and write about this, which is just so divine. Because as you know, Victorian times, if you didn't get engaged and married, that was it. That was it, over, done as a woman. And Jane Austen and the Brontes, I think Jane Austen maybe 42 when she died. The Brontes died by 40. There was, I mean, I know people did die earlier, but there was a sense that if women, in the 70s, you couldn't get a mortgage, or even you couldn't buy a dishwasher without a man's name.
Isn't that incredible?
Unbelievable. I think it's hard for people, younger women, to understand what women put up with in the 70s, and they would stay married because, it was very hard for women to find somewhere to go in the 70s. So
such courage and strength to get out of situations.
So even you navigating and talking about being single and feeling into that is quite groundbreaking, because that's not been what society's allowed.
I'm coming in the wake of lots of people that have been doing it over the last, I'd say, 5-10 years. There's been there's been a few books written about this, and everyone, when I've read them, I've been like, oh, thank God, yes, because it explains, there's one book called Spinster by Kate Pollock, and she's an American writer, and she explained that the word spinster didn't used to be an insult. It used to refer to a woman who span yarn for a living, therefore had an independent income and didn't need to be married. So they might be married, but you could still be a spinster and be married, but often they chose not to because they didn't financially need to. And so when you start to read different little things like this, you kind of go, amazing. Spinster wasn't the kiss of death at all. It was actually a really liberated position to be in.
That's so interesting, because gossip also, it comes from something about women when they got together when babies were being born. And I'm just going to have a look. I've just forgotten the it's the original. There's an original. But anyway, a lot of these words, they're beautiful, and even virgin. Yeah. Virgin didn't necessarily mean lack of sex. It could be an independent person as well. There were different definitions. For some people, I mean, I may be saying some of this not completely correctly, but I remember that bunch of gossips was, there were the women when the baby was born, a bunch of women would come together and chat, and it gives you a very different flavor. Spinster spinning and gossips are women chatting, because gossip sounds awful, doesn't it? It sounds awful.
It does. And then I also read that gossiping served a really vital purpose, which was when women could alert other women to things that were of danger. That if people's bad behavior was being talked about, which was some kind of way of policing villages and societies, so that
it's a really, really good point. So I think and obviously it's so lovely because you're honoring all these people who are coming out about stuff. And I just wondered, because of course, Sheer Height and other women who've written about women's experiences throughout time, Simone de Beauvoir, I mean, so many women, but you're writing in a time when it's much more acceptable to be a woman, writing about your vulnerability and your experience as a woman. The doorways are more open. It's not as harsh. So, but I just watched Caitlin Moran the other day, and she said every woman she knows who's a writer in her similar milieu has been shamed on social media. And they've learned how to handle it by closing down their social media for a bit, gathering themselves, gathering their friends, and coming back after a bit. But what I'm understanding from you, that's not been your experience. That hasn't been.
No, and I'm not on Twitter. I was on Twitter for a while, and Twitter seems like a very harsh place, and I'm too sensitive for it. So I'm not on Twitter.
Yeah. So where your milieu.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and I'm aware that I am really lucky, and that there will be a time when I do have to get some negative stuff, and I guess that's just part of being visible. And it would be a real shame to not do what you want to do for fear of that kind of kickback. But I'm scared of that stuff. I really am. And I think Caitlin Moran is so wonderful. The way she just seems to handle things with humor, and it's not that she's oblivious to it, because we're all humans. I don't know how you can be, but it seems like every woman that gets to some sort of level of visibility will get some pretty awful stuff coming at them.
She said, every time it's happened, it really is hurtful and damaging. But what she's learned is, you shut down, you protect, you go back to yourself, get in touch with your friends and other women who've been that, and you get solidarity. So you don't let it drown you. You just put your protections back. And I thought, that's great. It's a bit like sex or finances. Let's talk about this so people know what to do and how to navigate it. And that, obviously some famous women from the past would have been absolutely shredded. But nowadays that can also be talked about. How do you handle that? How do you go forward? And I remember Peter York saying, because he's been shredded a lot in newspaper articles when he's been interviewed about a book coming out. People have just ridiculed him on something. I said, how did you handle that? And he went, a third will like you, a third will hate you. You have to like yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that's where you are now. It sounds like you like yourself much more now, even though the voices can come.
The voices.
It
This
sounds
is what
like
I
there's
want.
more
Yeah.
likableness. There's more. Yeah.
I think as long as I this is also what lockdown has taught me a lot. As long as I am in like right relation, I don't know if that's the Buddhist term, right relation with my friends and my family, you know, my real people,
Yeah.
then hopefully everything else we can figure out. You know, that's, and I think also possibly what happened with the first book was because it was such a joy getting these messages from people. That became my real life too, and in a way it isn't. So they're not to say that, you know, because there's real friendships have formed, and I think for it to be sustainable in the future, it probably makes sense to limit, you know, times when you're on social media, so that it's not coming into my bedroom and if you know, if there are more negative comments coming. So yeah, I guess it's just to be prepared. And
So you know what? It just sounds beautiful. You're in your right time. You're in your right place. You have your spaciousness, and you're grounded. Your books are developing, and you may even be more protective of how you do things.
exactly,
Understandable the way you did it, because the world seems smaller and now it's
yes,
bigger.
exactly,
There's
exactly,
a different navigation, but
exactly.
you're in your right time, in your right place, and with the right support.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah,
many people in the past just wouldn't have had the other people around them to help them, or help call them on stuff, or guide
exactly.
them. Whereas it sounds like you've got it. Even though
Yeah,
it's learny makey, you have
yeah.
got so much in place. Yeah.
No, and I have a couple of good writer friends who are ahead of me on the, you know, on the ladder of things. And so it's been lovely that whatever time I've had a wobble, I've been able to pick up the phone and they know exactly what I'm talking about. And then there's that moment of, oh, okay, it's not just me. And yeah,
That's huge.
yeah,
That's what Caitlin Moran said,
yeah,
is get your other compatriots
yeah,
around you and just give them a call.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's perfect. Well, thank you so much, Marianne. I can't wait for the next book,
Oh, thanks. We've
because
got it.
I think there's so many assumptions in life, you know, there's so
Yeah,
many assumptions that we've all got it sorted or not sorted, or we're all, and it never is like that. It's always an ongoing journey. And I think this is what you
exactly.
named. And it
Yeah.
can drop down, get up, it can move around.
Exactly. This goes into the last chapter of this book that I'm finishing now. My friend said this once, and it was so clever. She said, you know, when we refer to so and so ended up with so and so, so she ended up with him. She said, no one ever ends up anywhere. Every day you get up and you start again. There is no guarantee. And so if you write a book and it does well, that doesn't mean you're then just sorted. And if you find a beautiful partnership, that doesn't mean that every day we just get up, we get up and we get up and we do okay some days, other days are a bit more wonky. And I guess that's just life, isn't it? And try and have a sense of humor about it all. Thank you
That's
to my mum and dad.
that's exactly
Yeah.
it. That's exactly it. There's a Buddhist thing again, you know, that there is no balance. Like
Yeah. You only ever go, yeah.
the next second could bring a complete surprise
Uh-huh.
you have to deal with, or the
Yeah.
next, you know, there is no balance, you know, because there's that aim, you know, when
Yes.
when I've got the, you know, we
And
all
it just
grow up
isn't
with
ever
that.
that. Life isn't, and I think if we ever did get there and we were stuck stationary, even if it was wonderful, we would die of boredom. It doesn't seem to be the human nature. I don't know what
No,
we'd do if we all
that's
just,
it. I think the
yeah,
one shift, which again is back to the Buddhist and probably all practices, is what do we have in our lives that helps us
yeah,
regulate?
yeah,
And I think this is also what you've named so much with your family and your
yeah,
friends, and the way you let go. And the thing which I loved what you said, which I really felt, in some ways these lockdowns, they've been tough, very tough, but then there's another piece, isn't there, which is that, you know, I'm someone, I love, the next book, the next course, the next this, and there's
yeah,
something about this time we're in. I've started to realize, or the next dress, you know,
yeah,
that
exactly.
I don't need so much.
It stripped a
I
lot away, didn't
I
it?
don't need, I don't, you know,
Yeah,
I'm quite happy with the clothes I've got. I'm
yeah,
quite happy.
yeah, me too. I've had, yeah,
I got this from
yeah,
your, you know,
yeah,
that there's enough.
yeah, there
There
really
used,
is.
there was that feeling I have to have.
Yeah, yeah,
And actually those people, you know, I watched a documentary on certain people very rich and famous, and I thought, wow, they're actually quite vulnerable, because you have to have that boat trip, you have to have that trip, you have to have that house, you have to have that. And I thought, it's very vulnerable to always have to have.
Yeah.
Or more power, more fame, more this, more that. It's quite, when we don't need much.
Yeah. It turns out. Yeah.
Turns out.
Yeah. Yeah.
We need enough. We need
Yeah.
enough.
You've a roof over your head and a pot.
But actually, it's quite nice to have it quite simple. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah. Oh, thank you very much.
Thanks,
That's
Kate.
brilliant.
Thanks,
Brilliant
Kate.
chat.
I felt like a therapy session. I could chat to you for hours.
I hope that was all right. I hope that was
lovely. No, it's great.
very nice.
So that was Marianne Power. Isn't she an absolute delight? Don't you just want to make her your best friend? Such a gorgeous, lovely woman, so authentic, so real, and so kind, and never losing her sense of her values and her own sense of integrity. So really enjoyed chatting to Marianne. I can't wait for her next book, which is probably going to be out in a year. Well, actually, I don't know exactly when it's going to be out, but I imagine it's going to be out soon. And I think that would be really wonderful, all about love and sexuality. So I hope that you enjoyed listening to Marianne. I really loved it. And tune in for more. Thanks very much.